Welcome to the basic guide mechanic of the Griffon. The aim of this series to look the mechanic in depth, exploring the style difference between wing and zoom, more precisely the EU versus NA cultural differences and how it affects how NA flies, and exploring new techniques and doing some critiques. I'm doing this for NA, but I think everyone will benefit from this. Reality of an NA flyer. 1. Flying people are rare in NA. 2. Flying cave for 2 hours alone can become quite boring. 3. Flying around in open air for more than 30 seconds is quite common, so no position rewinder. First point, NA relation with the Griffon. The Griffon is not popular in NA. Why? Reason 1. The collapse of NA guilds caused the community leader to vanish. The effect? The lack of basic training in NA. Reason 2. The time zone difference from the current authority wing and the nature of the training. Training to do dive 2 and micro dive, but now how to use the Griffon to fly around the map. The limited time and the need to understand in-depth mechanic is a challenging factor. The cause? Lack of exposure during prime time. The effect being many to quit, seeing the Griffon as still useless and only for stunts. Most of what I will show is transmitted through osmosis in NA South Asia and in EU. But in NA, the lack of exposure slows down the transmission of knowledge. Reason 3. The lack of interest from the top ones remaining in NA. The hypothesis? The lack of interest in the current culture. Cave stunts and rigid routes is not something that everybody likes to do with the Griffon. So, what does this video aim for? I'm aiming to show you how to fly the Griffon and use it as a day-to-day mount. These are the things we're going to look at. Helpful add-ons, stuff to practice, energy theory. First we will see the dives, the mechanics and the mistakes, the climb, the pulse, and the cycle concepts, the infinite flight. Henceforth, misconceptions. Spoiler! The Griffon is not a glider! You can move it in the x-axis and the z-axis for the distance you want and for how long you want. You do not need to land. The skyscale is a glider. You can't go nowhere without losing height after a distance in the x-axis. And this is not flying, this is hovering. You can't move from there without losing height. And here's some example of why people think that way. On top, this is mostly how people fly the Griffon usually. And on the left, you have the skyscale. And on the right, you have the correct way. Now let's see who gets further. And with the correct one, we're already done. And even more, we landed where we started. Even with the Griffon with the bad technique, we're further and we did not touch ground yet. And there goes the skyscale. And this is what it is about, to show you how to use the Griffon properly. And to help you more understand my video, here's an explanation of the gauges and add-ons. On the left, we have the visual of my inputs. On the right, we have the speed, acceleration, and maximum pull gauges. Add-ons from Blish. Racing meter. This add-on adds these gauges to help you understand how fast you are going and how low you dove. Now let's break down the component of these gauges. The altimeter. The L0 is the initial height. The higher the number, the lower is the dive. The red bar is the maximum pull cap. The actual position of the maximum pull cap only shows at L0. The amber color is downward acceleration. Upward acceleration is in purple. The crossover of the red and white line means the maximum pull cap has been reached. The light blue on the bottom is the ground effect. Add-on from Guild War II add-on loader, Radial mount. Radial mount lets you switch between your mount. I highly recommend you checking it out. It also has other very useful utilities. NOBOARD to show my inputs. My inputs are Q to pull, Shift to dive, W to look ahead, A to turn left, D to turn right, S to slow down or look backward. The stamina meter. This is the lowest point a flap can be made. Note that the stamina doesn't need to be at 100% to be used. You can either flap at 80% or maintain spacebar to flap when it is at 100%. Although it is better to spam spacebar to get the 80% one. The Jade bot, equipped with Mount Energy Booster that boosts your energy regeneration. This will make your stamina regen faster. Remember, more flap while cruising, the better your energy conservation is. Basic camera settings. Toggle action cam camera under settings. As you can see, you can move the cursor, but with action camera, you can look around. With action camera, you can aim with your mouse to steer the Griffon. Quick note, do not control your Griffon by clicking the icons. Do not. Use the keyboard. Coming to a closing on the intro, you should at this point have all the masteries on the Griffon and also have the Springer with 𝐴𝑉𝗺𝗺 mastery. Chapter 1. Dives and Energy Preservation. Dive 1. Simple dive press. Dive 2. Diving then flapping. Needs aerial finesse. Super speed done through Dive 2 to achieve the true speed of the Griffon. Dive 1. Dive 1 is done by pressing dive. Do not use dive 1 if you are not in super speed, otherwise it's a waste of energy. Dive 1, no flap. As you can see, there's no super speed. This is a showcase of energy preservation. There will be 4 tests. Dive 1 without flap, dive 1 with flap, dive 2 without flap, then dive 2 with flaps. The goal is to observe how much we maintain our height, how far we can go, and how much energy we have to pull. As you could see, just using dive 1 without flap was the worst. Critique of Kate's statement. Beginners often alterate the power of a wing flap. It is nothing to simply spam. From DreXed, Guild War II, Griffon Kindergarten, a detailed guide for absolute beginners and common mistakes. Beginners often alterate the power of a wing flap. It is nothing to simply spam. What does this mean? As a matter of fact, as I'm making this video, I trained somebody today and they were not flapping while cruising. They referred to that video. Do you mean beginners have trouble timing their flap? But we're not trying to teach them how to do stunts, just to fly around, so it does not matter. Do you remember the 80% wing flap stamina? Well, flapping maintains energy. Here's the proof. Do use flap when going around. You will go further. Dive 1 with flap. Flapping keeps energy. Either spam flap or hold it down. Although it is better to spam it to get the 80%. You get even better results if you have the Jade bot with the stamina booster. Well, as you can see, we're way higher than we were before with the no flap, but we do not have energy to pull up. Super speed. Dive 2. Dive 2 is used to get to super speed. Dive 2, no flap. You'll need the aerial finesse mastery for this one. As you can see, we're going way faster, but we're still losing speed and height. We do have this time energy to pull up, but trust me, we can do better. Breakdown to achieve super speed. Dive 2 with flap. Dive at full stamina. Start spamming flap when the animation changes. Release dive when the animation of the flap begins. The yellow aura means the dive was successful. It will continue to go down for a bit, then it will go back straight by itself. Well, that was a mouthful. Well, a lot of stuff happened very quickly. I recommend you to watch the clip again and pause between key points to just really understand what's happening. As you can see, we are higher on the end and we have a superior pull. This concludes this showcase. As you can see, using dive 2 and flapping is the superior way to go around, as it conserves the energy better. Diving common mistakes. It's a given, but look down before you dive. Simply doing dive 1. As we just saw, just doing dive 1 loses a lot of energy. So doing dive 1 while not being in super speed is just a net loss of energy. Late flapping. After the dive, if you wait too long to flap, you're losing a lot of energy because it will count as just a dive 1. You also eat up on the minimum of the dive 2 you have to perform. Thus, you might hit the ground. Bad timing flap. Sometimes people think that to do a dive 2 you need to dive and flap at the same time, but it is not the case, and if you do that you will probably end up like this. You lose a lot of energy doing that. Over flapping. When I say dive 2 I don't mean this. Flapping 2 times will not make you go faster. It is useless and you will only lose energy. Overdiving. Overdiving over the level 6 will just result in a net loss of energy. Anything above level 6, if you pull immediately after diving, you should be able to return to where you started. Waiting too long to dive. Waiting too long to dive will net a loss of potential maximum full pull, primarily due to the low speed. Ideal dive. Starting the dive at the best time, 80% on stamina, waiting to be in dive animation before flapping, releasing dive after flapping. With a good dive, you have an optimal full pull maximum and no loss. Here's something to practice your dive to. In Queensdale, at the bridge. On top of the Queensdale bridge, you will jump with the Griffon and do a dive 2. Any mistake will punish you. Don't stop until you can do it. Practice, practice, practice. Assessment of terrain. Now some theory about the terrain assessment. Dive 2 has an obligatory dive length. If not taken into account, it will result in a crash. Looking down to assess if the length required to do a dive 2 is important to do when diving. What we're seeking to do here is create a buffer zone between yourself after a dive 2 and the ground. This buffer zone is where you can play around by pulling and diving and doing a whole bunch of shenanigans. But eventually this buffer zone will deplete itself, and this will result in energy loss. Here's some example. After a pull, looking down, I see that there's not enough space to dive. I analyze the terrain and adjust accordingly. Chapter 2. The pulls, ground effect, and energy theory. When near of the water table of the map, the mechanic of ground effect takes place. To a certain speed, the ground effect will slow down your descent, as such making you able to fly for longer. Clarification of Fluffy's statement. How to train your Griffon stunt flying tutorial. Ground effect does not work at normal speed. Not exactly. Ground effect is still active, although due to low speed the descent rate is higher than the benefit of the ground effect. So yes. This detail helps us understand the lower the speed, the higher is the descent rate. Because the ground effect negates the descent rate, we can observe that when we go slower, the descent rate increases. The slower you go, the higher is your descent rate. Careful, I'm not saying lower speed is bad, I'm just saying it is an aspect to learn how to manage. Pulls, aka climbs, and energy loss theory. Maximum pull cap. Maximum possible height set on the switch to the Griffon or the initial dive. Full pull maximum. Maximum pull possible after energy has been lost. Some theory about the pulls. The maximum pull cap was the height at which the Griffon was when it started to fly. Although it is possible to go a bit higher than this. By higher I mean maybe the height of one wing flap. The maximum pull cap is the theoretical limit of which you could pull up to. Trying to go higher than this will feel like you're hitting a wall. The initial dive is the dive to get to super speed. After we traveled a X amount of distance, we pull to a full pull maximum. This is done by pressing pull until you cannot pull anymore. After this pull, you'll realize that you are lower than the maximum pull. This is a full pull maximum. It is lower than the maximum pull cap. The difference between the two is the loss of height, the energy used, done by diving, overdiving, mistakes, pulls, redive, distance traveled, or bunking. Distance travel with a X amount of speed will also affect that. Redive mechanic. Redive is done by pulling, but not to the full maximum. Then diving again. You will not have to do a dive too. You will regain speed. Although this costs a lot of energy, and doing it too much will soon make it stop working. It is also a good indication that you still have super speed active. The states of pulls. The full pull, done by pulling to the maximum currently possible. The cut pull, or the micro pulls, not fully pulling or tapping pull, mostly done to adjust your position. The full pull, done by pressing pull until you reach the current maximum, although this is not the maximum pull cap. Cut pull and micro pull. Cut pull are done by not fully pulling up. This to some extent costs energy. We will see how a little bit later. Pulls also slow you down, and the slower you go, the more is your descent rate. Micro pull are done by just tapping pull. Doing it too much will result in the maximum full pull lost. You might have heard that pulling to adjust is bad. Nope. Do not dismiss micropulls to your training because you lose energy. Learn to manage this energy loss and your flexibility will multiply. Your ability to adapt and fly longer will benefit to your enjoyment. Rule of 3, sort of. You can pull 3 times and on the 4th do a full pull to assess your height. Speed range energy management. When your speed is in the 100 to 90 zone, you are in the safe zone. When your speed is in the 80 zone, you are in the low concern zone. It is when you hit the 70 zone that you should start to think to pull. Then assess your height, then dive again to regain speed. Usually full pull in the 70 range. It goes like this. First pull will be 90, second will be 80, third will be 70. Be careful when pulling to half of the full pull, since your speed will decrease significantly. Here's another schematic to explain the energy loss when doing a cut pull. Remember the energy loss and speed ratio? After pulling, the more time spent at low speed will result in more energy lost. The less time spent after a pull at low speed will result in less energy lost. Conclusion: after a pull in relation with the post-pull speed, cruising has to be managed accordingly. 90 to 80 could be held longer than speed at 70 before it becomes too critical and no more pull to be possible. Types of micropulls. FF micropull saves on pull thus energy, done by either flapping then pulling or pulling then flapping. The micropull, simply tapping pull, usually flapping after. The 𝐵 flap, the obstacle has to be at the same height as your beat. Then with timing, just press flap. The flap under pull, flap, then tap pull. The pull under flap, tap pull, then press flap. Flapping during and after a pull. Clarifying Kate statement, do not flap after a pull. To an extent, yes, you should not flap after releasing pull, but said like this is a bit confusing and inaccurate. You can flap and should flap while pulling up and after. There's just a really tiny window where you should not flap. That is, flapping on the animation after releasing pull. As you can see here, the statement is true, but let's break it down. When you release pull, you go into a transient animation. If you flap during this transient animation, there will be a collapse of speed and full pull energy. You will not have super speed anymore. Flapping while pressing pull. If you press flap while pull is pressed, it's okay. You will not lose super speed, except if you go too high. Same for flapping after the animation. I trained people that were confused about this statement. The statement should not be don't let go of climb and flap right after. The statement should be don't flap during the transient animation. That said, this also applies to the dive. Practice your micro pull in 𝐂𝐕𝐄 or anywhere, to be honest. Get low and try to fly while following the terrain as low as you can. Do not full pull because you're gonna crash. Do follow the rules of 3, and on 4th pull, then you can do a full pull. Cycles, regaining lost height. This concept is the single most important thing of this mount. You need to understand it to truly start to enjoy the Griffon. Otherwise, yes, the Griffon will be a glider. Pull techniques. The normal pull versus the dive pull. The normal pull has energy lost if done in dive 1, maximum pull reset if done in dive 1. But you only have one flap on pull. In a full pull, the more flap you have, the better your energy will be on exit. The dive pull. The dive pull is done by holding the dive button and the pull button at the same time. You gain faster stamina regen, a greater energy on exit of the pull, and one more flap on pull. I repeat, you flap when you do a full pull. You need to flap when you pull up. There with the normal pull, we can observe a loss of energy and that the max pull resets. There with the dive pull, we can observe a faster stamina regen, more energy on the pull exit, 2 flaps instead of 1, and we are regaining energy. You might have heard that you need aerial finesse to regain energy. This is a showcase that you don't need to have aerial finesse to regain height. I will regain height by just using dive 1 with dive pull. The trick is to hit the maximum speed of dive 1, that is 65, then pulling and doing a dive pull. It is a useful trick if you don't have enough space to do a dive 2. Example of a standard cycle. I'm using a technique to lose a lot of maximum pull height. Now I want you to observe my first full pull, how low I am, then how I regain my height. As long as after your full pull you have enough buffer to either do the technique I just showed you or a dive 2, you should be able to go into a cycle, then regain energy to stay airborne. Proper technique is to land back where you started. Mistakes made. Waiting too long in full pull, with flap and without flap. Not flapping will net a loss in potential full pull to your next dive. As you know now, staying in low speed loses energy. As you can see in my next pull, I lost a lot of energy. To remedy some of that effect, it is better to flap when in full pull. In some situation, you will have to stay in full pull and look around like that. When in this situation, flap to preserve your energy. Still, waiting between cycles makes you lose potential. Idling between cycles. As we know now, idling at low speed is bad. And during a cycle, we're trying to minimize the loss to a minimum, so that at each cycle, we gain height. Therefore, staying idle after a pull or after a dive loses energy. As we can see here, idling on pull will lose energy, and idling on dive will also lose energy. Idling while doing a cycle does not regain energy. We're not regaining height. This is the correct way. No waiting, no idling, back to back, up and down. Just going around like this without flapping cost me a lot of potential. Check out my next full pull. This is what you're gonna look like. Try to spot the mistakes. Okay, it is better to proceed to a dive 2 to super speed than just continuing to do dive 1s. It is also better after a mistake to fully pull, then try again a dive 2 to super speed. If not possible, just abort. Breakdown of a cycle. Here's some theory about the cycle. Imagine the cycle as being a block. After going around and losing energy, you will assess on your first pull. Then if the obstacle you're trying to pass over is not above this after diving in dive 2, you will start a sequence of cycles until you can clear over this obstacle. You repeat the dive and pull until you have regained your height. It's not just one pull and dive. You repeat it like it's a beat, this section of a cycle. As usual, you dive, you flap, release dive when the flapping animation begins. Right after diving, start holding pull while the dive 2 animation is still going. Do a full pull with the dive pull method until you reach the apex. Then dive again and repeat. Do not wait, do not take pause. I'm gonna drill it again. Idling is bad. Do not wait like this. Or like this. You do it like this and only like this. When maximum pull cap is achieved, do not stay in the maximum full pull. Dive in super speed to conserve energy. Do not pull again if it's not to 1. Land. 2. Initiate another cycle. 3. Evade an obstacle. Follow rule of 3. When you want to land back, be as close as possible as you can to where you want to land. Otherwise, you're just losing height. Your first stunt, flying in Queensdale. 1. You will go as high as you can. 2. You will use the cycle to fly around the map. 3. You will land back where you started. 3.1. Do not F it. Where you started and above. It is okay to do it like this to begin with, but you don't need to stay at the maximum pull cap all the time. For now, it is okay, you are learning how to do it, but doing it like this just makes you slow, and it defeats the purpose of the Griffon. But I do understand that this sequence is hard to get, therefore train it as much as you can. This is the cornerstone of how the Griffon is flown. Okay, so like we saw in the last clip, staying in cycles all the time is just slow, but it maintains height. We need to learn to manage this energy to stay in super speed. What did we see so far? We know that to do a dive 2, you need to have a minimum height. We know that when we pull up and we want to dive again, we need to have enough buffer zone to do it. We know that going around will cost us energy, and the difference between the maximum pull cap and this full pull is the energy that has been lost. Now to evaluate if you need to do cycles to regain height, you first do a full pull. Look down to evaluate if you have enough space to do a dive 2. If the buffer zone is too reduced to go around and fly, or that you cannot clear the obstacle you're aiming for, you go into a cycle. You do not need to do cycles until you hit the maximum pull cap. On each dive part of the cycle, you can reevaluate if you have enough buffer zone. My next clip will demonstrate exactly this graphic. We're gonna go around to lose energy, using a lot of micro pull to lose energy. We go into a full pull to assess the lost energy. We look down to assess if we have enough space to dive in dive 2 to super speed. Then we're doing an assessment of the buffer zone. It's too low here. We're gonna do a cycle block. Here we're gonna do 2 cycles. We can see that the buffer zone is partially restored, and we have enough space to go above the obstacle. Compounding. We start with a good timing on the dive, to go to super speed to maintain energy. We keep flapping to maintain energy too. If we need to clear some obstacle, we follow the rule of 3. We still keep flapping. And we keep track of the rule of 3. Next pull will be a full pull. We assess the remaining energy. The obstacle ahead is too low to pass on super speed. We do some cycles. Now we land back where we started. We do cycles until we are above where we started. And to land, we're trying to stay as close as possible to where we want to land. We are above where we started, and we're gonna land. Stuff to practice again. Micro pulls in Queensdale. Go around the hills and follow the rules of 3. Practice how much you need to press pull, the timing and the rhythm. Manage your energy and cycles need. Yes, this is the best way to practice your energy management. It's also good to know your pull rhythm for stunts later on, if stunts you want to do. Also, to practice your dive precision, where? Well, anywhere. It is an easy practice. When flying around, just pick a tree, a roof, or anything and try to dive next to it at the same height to where you are aiming. Say we are aiming at the roof, we're gonna keep track of the roof, then dive and release as best as we can next to the roof. For starter, we might underdive or overdive. Precision comes with practice. As anything I showed you in this video, only practice will make it better. And this is the closure of my video. I have other videos on this series that might be out by the time you're watching this, such as some ad-lib videos on some techniques, a video on camera technique, and on stunts technique, where we're gonna explore the difference between the techniques used by Wing and the techniques used by me. Thus said, the videos of the persons I critiqued or did some clarifications are in the description down below. Maybe hearing something differently from somebody else might help you understand more. If you are one of the person I critiqued and you have some critique about my video, I invite you to do so. The more video we make on the Griffon and their mechanics, the better the information will be for new players. And with this, thank you for watching and have a good day.